The paradox of repetition. Why we tune out what matters most. In a world bombarded by information, we often find ourselves tuning out the messages that are most important. Whether it's about health, climate change, relationships, or even personal growth, the critical lessons are repeated so often that they fade into the background. What is important is often stated ad nauseum, so frequently and persistently that people tend to stop listening. This tendency is not just a quirk of human nature. It reflects a deeper discomfort with confronting difficult truths, especially when they require us to change our habits, beliefs, or behaviors. The paradox of repetition is that while constant reminders about crucial issues are necessary, they can also lead to desensitization. People become fatigued by hearing the same messages over and over, leading them to dismiss or ignore what they know is important. Understanding this phenomenon requires exploring the psychology behind why we tune out repeated messages, as well as examining the historical and cultural implications of ignoring what truly matters. Psychologically, humans are wired to focus on novelty. When something is new or unexpected, it captures our attention. This is why we are more likely to engage with breaking news or fresh information than with messages we've heard countless times. Our brains are designed to filter out what seems familiar and routine in favor of what feels urgent or exciting. Cognitive scientist Daniel Kahneman, in his book Thinking, Fast and Slow, explains that our minds use shortcuts to navigate the overwhelming amount of information we receive each day. This process, called cognitive ease, makes it easier for us to focus on what seems new and tune out what we perceive as old or repetitive. But this tendency to ignore familiar messages comes at a cost, especially when it concerns vital issues. Take, for example, public health campaigns. Messages about the dangers of smoking, the importance of exercise, or the need to reduce sugar intake are repeated endlessly by health organizations, and for good reason. They are key to preventing chronic diseases and improving quality of life. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence and consistent messaging, many people still smoke, lead sedentary lives, or consume unhealthy diets. One study published in the American Journal of Public Health found that repeated public health messages can lead to message fatigue, where people become numb to the very warnings that are meant to protect them. This phenomenon can also be observed in discussions about climate change. For decades, scientists, activists, and policymakers have warned about the devastating consequences of global warming. The messages about rising sea levels, extreme weather patterns, and the need for urgent action have been repeated so often that many people have begun to tune them out. According to a 2020 study by the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, while a majority of Americans believe climate change is real and caused by human activity, only 25% of those surveyed said they discuss the issue often. This gap between knowledge and action reflects the fact that constant repetition of dire warnings can sometimes lead to disengagement rather than increased awareness. Throughout history, societies have often ignored or dismissed repeated warnings about important issues, leading to catastrophic consequences. One of the most famous examples is the fall of the Roman Empire. For years, Rome's leaders were warned about the internal corruption, economic instability, and military overextension that were weakening the empire. Historians such as Edward Gibbon, in his work The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, argued that the failure of Rome's leaders to address these repeated warnings led to the eventual collapse of one of the greatest civilizations in history. The repetition of these issues, over time, caused them to be downplayed or ignored until it was too late. In more recent history, the financial crisis of 2008 serves as another example of what happens when important warnings are dismissed. For years, economists and financial experts raised concerns about the growing housing bubble and the risks of subprime mortgages. However, these warnings were often overshadowed by the booming housing market and the short-term profits being made by financial institutions. When the bubble finally burst, the global economy was thrown into chaos, resulting in massive job losses, foreclosures, and a long-lasting recession. The repetitive warnings had been drowned out by the optimism of the crowd, highlighting the danger of tuning out important messages. One reason people tune out repeated messages is that they often highlight uncomfortable truths. Acknowledging these truths means facing the need for change, and change is inherently uncomfortable. Whether it's the personal discomfort of adopting healthier habits or the collective discomfort of addressing systemic issues like climate change or inequality, it is often easier to ignore what is difficult than to confront it head-on. This tendency to avoid discomfort is deeply ingrained in human nature. Psychologist Leon Festinger developed the concept of cognitive dissonance, which explains how people experience mental discomfort when they hold two conflicting beliefs or behaviors. For example, a person who smokes despite knowing the health risks will experience cognitive dissonance, leading them to either change their behavior or rationalize it to reduce the discomfort. In many cases, people choose to rationalize or ignore the message, rather than confront the need for change. This explains why messages about personal responsibility, whether related to health, finances, or the environment, are often met with resistance. It is easier to continue with the status quo than to make the necessary changes that would improve one's life or the world. The repetition of these messages only heightens the discomfort, leading to further avoidance and disengagement. Given the human tendency to tune out repeated messages, how can we ensure that the important issues remain front and center? One strategy is to reframe the message in ways that resonate emotionally. Research shows that people are more likely to engage with messages that tap into their values, emotions, and sense of identity. For example, public health campaigns that focus on the positive aspects of healthy living, such as increased energy, longevity, and the ability to spend more time with loved ones, can be more effective than messages that focus solely on the negative consequences of unhealthy behaviors. In the realm of climate change, shifting the narrative from doom and gloom to one of opportunity and innovation can also re-engage people who have become fatigued by repeated warnings. By emphasizing the potential for green jobs, renewable energy, and sustainable cities, the conversation can move from one of fear to one of hope and possibility. This approach encourages people to see themselves as part of the solution, rather than as passive recipients of endless bad news. Another strategy is to vary the method of communication. Repetition alone can lead to message fatigue, but introducing new voices, fresh perspectives, and different formats can help keep important issues in the spotlight. Whether through storytelling, visual media, or community engagement, finding creative ways to communicate critical messages can prevent people from tuning them out. Repetition is necessary when it comes to important issues, but it can also lead to desensitization and disengagement. People tend to tune out messages that are repeated ad nauseum because they highlight uncomfortable truths that require change. However, history and psychology show us that tuning out these warnings comes at a high cost, both personally and collectively. To prevent this, we must find new and engaging ways to keep important issues at the forefront of public consciousness. By tapping into people's emotions, values, and sense of identity, and by varying the ways in which messages are delivered, we can break through the noise and inspire meaningful action. Ultimately, the goal is not just to repeat what is important but to ensure that it is heard, understood, and acted upon.